First thing is, you're going to try your hand at being a YouTuber. Now, if you're already a YouTuber, good luck to you. This is going to be kind of easier for you. And I hope you will share your wisdom. Okay. Most of you are not. Um, I do know at another institution where my partner works. One of their Ninensei has a non-mining follower, hugely popular. Okay. But I have more exposure probably than I want to because of my young son. His mother still hasn't forgiven me for this because I got an Amazon Fire Stick and connected YouTube to the television. He is absolutely addicted to Japanese YouTubers, so Hikakin and Hajime Shacho and Maisen and a whole bunch of them. Seems to be the only thing that is constantly on the television these days. Free-to-air television can't compete, the news can't compete, and all the rest of it. And of course, like so many other 10-year-olds, he is simultaneously trying to eat dinner, play Minecraft, and Switch at the same time, while also watching his favorite kind of gaming YouTubers. So I am deeply steeped in Japanese YouTube kind of culture, more than I want to be. So it's not just that I want you to all try your hand at a bit of celebrity and monetizing it through Google, YouTube. We're moving to an era, we already are in an era, obviously, where even kind of amateur-made content can, first of all, be hugely profitable and very, very influential, far more influential in many ways than traditional media. Now, the vast majority of organizations, whether they're for-profit companies, not-for-profits, political parties and whatnot, recognize this. And so, of course, they're trying to partner with YouTubers. They're trying to create their own content. They're trying to get attention. And effectively, we're in competition for people's eyeballs, for their attention, for their time, for their emotional engagement. So you're going to have a try out at being a YouTuber yourself. I'll give you some more details about the parameters of the project, like how long the video should be, theme and whatnot. But it's quite straightforward as a simple title. The unique and likable truth of you. Okay, so this is we'll work to typically about 3 minutes. Okay, this is going to be a 3-minute, well-produced kind of video, which makes you look unique, interesting. People that can form an emotional kind of attachment with you. Hopefully not psychos, just the kind of people you want to form an emotional attachment with. So it's fine that 95% of the people hate you if 5% of the people you want to be liked by really like you. That's actually one of key things about communication strategy. Decide who you want to be liked by, because you can be liked by all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. Okay, and you need to be aware of that kind of thing. Some of the objectives involve fostering some basic skills, video making and sharing, but also just as an outlet for your creativity and visuality, because one of the really striking things, of course, in Japanese university education and so many other places, we favor certain kinds of knowledge over others, typically kind of text-based and numerically based kind of knowledge, so the sciences and the humanities. But there are other ways of seeing the world that are often much more visual care. Okay, some people's brains really work very much in this way. Some people are much more very Ronny-techy and like to be trying to be seeking absolute truths and clear-cut answers. Many people are happier with ambiguity and open-ended questions and creative explorations. I believe everyone is capable of all of them. What we can clearly see is that the educational path that many people follow into a place like Waseda tends to prioritize certain forms of knowledge and learning, and often you haven't had those kind of positive creative outlets. Okay, so that's one of the objectives of the course, and we thought a simple way to do this, of course, is to get you being a bit creative, and you even have the basic tools of what you need. You know, your phone is very good these days. Of course, it mostly has a wide angle lens, but you can use these to great effect. Okay, and we'll talk a lot more about that. So effectively, I want you to have a very kind of production-centered insight into the phenomena of YouTubers and other video loggers, vloggers, okay? And more corporations, in MPOs, NGOs are creating their own content rather than kind of outsourcing it to pros. They're making it in-house, but having people have some of those basic skills. Because timeliness is so important. You want to very quickly engage with an audience, and often just putting a 1 minute or a 30-second even or 2-minute video up in a timely way has a much greater impact than saying outsource to a production company with very, very long lead times. So those kind of skills are important. It's also, if you're interested in going into any kind of advertising branding agency, or even just so many large companies, the very fact that because you're bilingual or multilingual, you're quite likely when you're being deployed in a company, there's a very good chance that you will be nudged, forced, pushed into the direction of corporate communications. That's been one of the great weaknesses for Japanese companies, that they haven't had people who've had the language and the cultural savvy to very effectively do corporate communications across cultural, linguistic, national divides. And when we talk about compliance issues and whatnot, we'll see that even in basic things like investor relations, talking to stockbrokers, talking to shareholders and whatnot. Clearly, language skills are absolutely vital, and an awareness of compliance, but even social media skills and whatnot are becoming quite important. Anyone who's been recently into kind of day trading or tempted to dip their toe in the water there would know that we've had astonishing stock market bubble, particularly out of the US, with individual investors in the last few months. Very different from the big financial houses. There's been very much driven by influential social media sites. Sometimes people are being badly manipulated in things like what we call pump and dump. You hype something, you buy it cheap, you hype it, and when all the suckers jump in on the trade, you sell it at a profit. A friend of mine who works for one of the top gaishikei finance firms here in Tokyo and makes multiples of what I make, and good luck to him. He spends most of his money on art, and so he recycles it in the best possible way. He reckons most of his clients are not making any money now, but he reckons a bunch of interesting young people are, and good luck to them. So we're in this strange place now where even what should be really hard-headed calculations in finance increasingly have a kind of a social media and a new media dimension to them. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of kind of fraudulent claims out there, a lot of manipulative behavior, but we see this as well too ubiquitously in an era of self-branding and social media. And I will share the link subsequently if you want to check it out. Have a look at influencers in the wild, the interesting hashtag. You can see where lots of people post videos or pictures of other people making a complete idiot of themselves, making selfie videos for TikTok or whatever in public places. So just look for influencers in the wild, and you probably won't need work done at least for a couple of hours as you go back through the feed and look at all the interesting things there. I probably shouldn't tell you about it because it'll make you a little bit more wary about using the city as your backdrop for your own video, but who cares? One of the key things in being either a photographer, which I used to work at and still very eager about, or a videographer, is that you actually have to stop seeing around you. You actually have to just get really focused on the camera or the scene that you want to capture or whatever, and just become a little bit oblivious to others. Even if other people are looking at you askance, thinking you're a bit of a mewaka, that's kind of what you have to do to get the shot. Okay. Now, oops, sorry, I keep bumping this. Another motivation for getting into do this, of course, is as we're now virtually here, and with Dr. Johns, we're going to be making some video on demand content. Those of you who took my Introduction to Business course know that I made a lot last year, and I'm making more this time round. So the universities themselves, a whole bunch of old people like me suddenly had to figure out how to be digital content producers. And of course, as you know, a lot of the quality is pretty bad, but onwards and upwards. So to some degree, that's a rationale as well for getting yourselves to have a go at this. Okay. I think in one way, the world has permanently changed in that a lot of people have realized that when you master just a few basic techniques, you have interesting means of communicating and connecting with people with digital content that can be distributed freely. So sorry, there's a bad oiji gag here. COVID creation in the sense of video, bear with me. Just getting old and don't have an audience anymore. Very important thing is this is a solo exercise, but I will reward people for actively sharing tips, know-how, if you've already done this stuff before, or if you find a whole bunch of additional resources, which would be very good to help people out. Anything from how to frame a video, the basics of uploading to YouTube and whatnot, although there'll be a lot of advice on that. What's going to happen with it? You will upload it to YouTube yourself, and I've got some details here. We'll explain further about it, how you can create your own sub-channels so that it doesn't necessarily get associated with your regular YouTube account. That's very, very easy to do once you know how to do it. You can have multiple sub-channels. And then you will post the link to Moodle through a dedicated interface for doing that. And then I will take all the links and I will make a playlist of class members' videos. The most important thing to keep in mind when you're uploading, I'll tell you now, but this is going to be weeks and weeks later. A lot of people instinctively, when they see a little box which says this content is made for children, and a lot of people think, oh, there's nothing rude in my video, I might as well click this. They have a very kind of positive compliance thing. Don't do that. Okay. Do not say your content is made for children. If it's made for children, it can't be added to a playlist by third parties, can't be embedded or anything, and it messes up completely our playlist. Okay. So this is, it's not in a not for children kind of R-rated, X-rated thing. God forbid, no, because it's going to go on a playlist, but just don't tick that box that says that it was made for children. Okay. But I'll come back to that. Okay, if you're really conscious about having your name on it, and you fear that you're going to be kidnapped by gangsters and your parents are going to get a bill for $10 million to get you back in one piece and still alive, then you can use a pseudonym. That's fine. Now, the group project, I've already hinted on it. There'll be a lot more information coming about this, okay? The rough title is The Campus as Communication, and you'll get a detailed explanation of it. It will be done in the second half of the semester primarily, but yourselves can have a bit of a head start on it. When the groups are all completely finalized, that's when you'll also get the details. I was a little bit wary about giving the full details in advance because some people make up their mind about how it is and what it should be done. Then they form in a group and then they try and force all the group members to their own view. So I'm got a little bit light on assessment this time round. I am conscious I probably made people do too much, for example, in the introduction to business last year. I think we tended to overreact a little bit to going online. And so I've kind of wound it back a bit. We do have 5 quizzes though, okay? And they're paced throughout the semester. I've got the dates here. And please, please, please take these seriously. I see a few familiar names here who are in enterprise and governance. Delighted to see a few names from students who did outstandingly well. I mentioned Akari before, who was top of the class along with another student. So wonderful to see you again. Thank you for your huge contribution. A few people failed that course last semester, and then only one person actually messaged me saying, kind of, how come I failed, and had failed every single quiz throughout the semester. Not even took one actually, and so it is a really concrete measure of the level of engagement, particularly in that class. The quizzes were weighted actually larger than this, but this is a third. Okay, it is quite substantial. These are not just little formative things that I've just got there as katachi dake. I mean, these are serious things. Okay, everyone will do them at the same time. I know exactly how people try to cheat on these. The usual thing is one mate does it in advance. click through, and get to the end when it displays your attempt, and you PDF it, and then you send it to your friend, and then your idiot friend, as soon as they get it, starts at 1 minute after you've done it. And then you do that 3 times in a row. And because all the exams are date stamped, it's abundantly clear who was helping who. Okay. Similarly, if you start the quiz at, in the past, you know, when you could do them at any time and people all started at the same time and all picked the same answers, it's like, oh yeah, and who paid for the pizza when you worked on it together? Come on, guys. So the way it's going to work this time around is they'll all start at the same time. You'll have a reasonable time. There'll be 20 questions a time. There'll be something like 40 minutes to do it. Not too long so that you can take your time and share screenshots of all the answers, but enough time to think about the questions and answer them, okay? And I will say that the vast majority of people did this in a very, obviously did it in a very nice, motivated, kind of solo kind of way. And I'm very grateful that the vast majority of people did the right thing. But there's always a few people who kind of tried on a little bit, okay? Which has been mildly disappointing, but arguably we were too trusting in the first place. So I've had to design it so it's a little bit of a tighter exercise. And then the engagement, this is only 10%, but it's a very important 10%. Difference between getting 9 or 10 out of 10 on this and getting 0 can be a difference between not 1, but like 2 grades, literally, because of, you know, the bell curve, people tend to bunch. Okay. So what is engagement? Well, active participation. Okay. Whether it's face-to-face, and there'll be a bit of that, not too much, or concert or virtual. You'll have a choice, those of you who are abroad. I'll talk further about this later on. Most importantly, it's active engagement with your group members and the online forum we've had, if you're contributing there. So if you've got any tips to share, for example, really basic things like what we call scrapbooking. This is going to be important for the group work when you're actually collecting a whole bunch of materials for your project. You know, how do you manage the digital flow? So people want to share that. Any tips on visualization, video production, all of those things are good. And also on the forum too, if you can share examples of maybe good and bad corporate communications that you come across throughout the semester. Okay, so that's where we are with that. Okay. Let me turn next to, first of all, any questions? Okay. Feel free to unmute and ask me a question. Don't be shy. It's actually nice to know that there are real human beings out there. So everyone's good. Okay, well, you'll have heaps of opportunities to interact. And there were dates there on that as well. So the first critical thing, of course, is other than just keeping up with the links and some reading links and other materials I will be providing, and particularly carefully engaging with the lecture note material. The end of May, that's when you'll be doing your YouTuber kind of submission. That will be the critical thing. Now, to put it in perspective in terms of engagement with the content, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me is when students get a disappointing grade and they kind of write to me and say, you know, this happened both the last 2 semesters. It's like, oh, I thought I was going to do better than this. And when I then go back into, and I sometimes do it in advance, but often in a retrospective kind of way, I go back in and I look at all the records in Moodle and realize that people didn't even bother to download the lecture notes. You know, if you take the quiz without even had a copy of the lecture notes, you know, it's kind of like waking up in the morning and punching yourself in the head. You know, there is some really basic stuff you can do to keep on top of it. And as I say, all the lecture note material is already, up until week 9, is already available. So you could actually be weeks and weeks ahead of myself if you choose to be, if you anticipate being particularly busy later. Now, how that material is going to be presented, some of it will be presented live. I will do some video on demand stuff as well. And I know some of you will be wondering about what's the face-to-face and the virtual thing. The core content, because we've got 100 students and because, as it's turned out, the pandemic numbers are still really high and likely to be rising. I think we really are in the middle of a fourth wave. So the core content transmission is going to be virtual. And particularly because we also have a number of people who just can't get back to Japan. And we first did the syllabi back in mid-January. There was this hope that the lockdown, well, not the lockdown, but the state of emergency would bring the kind of results that we saw in late spring last year, where the numbers in Tokyo fell down to almost zero. That just hasn't happened, okay? And actually, here's my chance to also say, don't think COVID isn't really relevant to you. One of my zemisei, brilliant zemisei, who is also to be doing research for me, research assistant, along with another zemisei, she can't leave home for 2 weeks because some idiot friend of hers, so I believe is a still student, this is the second time this has happened to her, said, let's catch up for lunch. And said, oh, by the way, I'm not feeling very well. My friend got COVID. And when was the last time you saw him? Oh, I saw him 3 days ago. I saw him 5 days ago. I saw him 7 days ago. So why are you having lunch with me? Okay. So this is the second time this has happened to her now. And so she's stuck at home for 2 weeks, not being able to do anything. And she is not happy. Okay. So there are some intelligent people with nonetheless a capacity for utter idiocy when it comes to biohazards in a pandemic, okay? And lest you think it only touches young people lightly, I suggest you go to the New York Times and read some of the stories there about the impacts even on young people. The one that horrifies me, the thing that makes me most afraid of getting it, is that a not insignificant number of people lose any sense of smell for weeks, months, and some people have kind of seemed to have permanently lost their sense of smell. Now, if you lose your sense of smell, you lose your sense of taste, because most taste actually is smell, okay? And the really interesting effect, and we'll actually talk about this when we're talking about designing spaces and brand interfaces, is that your brain can't deal with the loss of smell, because you expect, for example, if you see takoyaki for it to smell a certain way, you see the sea, you expect it to smell a certain way, you expect the McDonald's Big Mac to smell a certain way, okay? And when it doesn't, your brain can't process it. So it's acutely disorienting, okay? It's as if you're looking at a language that you're a native speaker of, you know the letters, but you can no longer read it, okay? So that's effectively how the brain experiences something like that. So for goodness sake, don't take this too lightly. Besides, you might end up killing your elderly professors or your grandparents or something like that, okay? If you hand it on to people. So particularly the normike, okay, and whatnot. So they are concerns. But at the same time, I have secured a room here, actually a ridiculously large room over in building 15, cavernous, huge room. It's like too big to be good, actually, and that's kind of put me off doing kind of face-to-face stuff. But I do tend to have us, those of you who want to be here face-to-face to interact. We'll have some talking points, some mini tasks, particularly in the second half of the course when we're doing the group work. The consultation will be hugely important. What I anticipate there is we'll have week by week. 1 week will be a online drop-in session, which I've done in previous courses, and I had only a minority of students join, but it was incredibly rewarding. I've got to know some students better than I normally would face-to-face, because people dropped in and we chatted about things, whatever they wanted to talk about, whether it's about the course or whatever, or assessment items. So I really want to keep doing that. So when we have video on demand, that actually frees up extra time. And so I'm going to make sure that if you want it, the regular full-time, full 2 Korma equivalent experience, partly this virtual and partly face-to-face or drop-in virtual, will be available to you. When I'm assigning the groups too, I'm going to need to know exactly who has a preference for virtual and who has a preference for face-to-face, qualified by the fact that if the pandemic gets really bad, you might have to go back to virtual to complete the group project. And then I will assign the groups based on that. Now, just one final thing in terms of the timing, and this is where this is a hearing. This is why you haven't had a really concrete statement on exactly what time each week the Zoom session will be. From week 10 to week 15 is the collabo with Sophia. Okay, now Sophia University has already done something that Waseda has just decided to do belatedly, but no one really wants to do, including Sophia. They've moved to Hyapun Jugyo, so 100-minute classes and shorter semesters. And this is kind of Monkashol's idea, and it's very true to Hampa. Only bureaucrats could think of it kind of way, where the idea is to encourage semesters to be cut into quarters. And the original motivation was therefore students would have more flexibility. They could go abroad more easily. Visiting professors could come. It's COVID, but anyway. I personally think it's a bit true to Hampa. I would rather see it go like Lund or Colorado College or something where, you go blocks, like, students just do one thing for 4 weeks and then they do something else. That would be the best way to do it. But anyway, that's just too difficult. So anyway, Sophia has moved towards quarters and 100-minute classes. And to accommodate that, and a number of other places have done this, Meiji and others too, the class times are a bit different from Waseda. So their Sangen starts, period 3 starts at 1:30, Ichiji Han. So I actually just interacting with Professor Johns. He's crazy busy, seeing he became head of department since the 1st of April. So we just managed to confirm before. For our collabo classes from week 10, we'll kick off a Zoom session at 1:45. And the rationale is that extra 15 minutes he can iron out technical issues at Sophia, because they're trying to do a high flex thing and they've spent lots of money putting good quality mics and cameras in classrooms, which Waseda's hardly done. That's why we're not really trying high flex. Most people are just kind of going online because it's really, really difficult to do. Anyone who's been involved in producing a streamed event will know the technicalities, the technical issues are quite serious. But anyway, so he will have some students present in the classroom and some students not. And then everyone will be connecting through Zoom. And most weeks, though, everyone will just be on Zoom. We do it together. So what we'll do is, from week 10, we'll go from 1:45. This has a certain advantage for us too, in that we'll have 2 quizzes during that period. And we can do the quiz online, and then you can just kind of stay online and engage through the Zoom session. And in the remaining time at the end, will either be a digital, a virtual consultation, or I'll jump up and I'll zoom down to building 15 and you can talk to me down there in the classroom. One other thing too, of course, is that even when we're doing the things online, if you need a space here on campus, if you are on campus now, I imagine some of you are, you can use the classroom, and it is really big and you can spread out. So the one advantage of that ridiculously oversized classroom is that even if you unmute yourself and speak on Zoom, if you're sufficiently far away enough, you shouldn't be getting bad feedback. Some of you may have had this experience if you're sitting next to someone in a coffee shop, and both of you are joining the same class and you both unmute, it can cause horrible kind of feedback effects and whatnot. So feel free to use that classroom over there. I can't vouch for the quality of the Wi-Fi. I can say the seats are horrible, but hopefully the Wi-Fi is pretty good. So when we do the face-to-face, it makes much more sense to do it after the live session, or the virtual session here in Zoom, and I zoom down there, no pun intended, and you can interact with me face to face. Now, that's a little bit different from what I had written tentatively on the syllabus, that I was thinking that the live session would always be in period 4 and the everything else would be in period 3. Now, what actually happened last year in this course was we had live sessions always in period 4, and then everything else was just video on demand in period 3. And it was only based on my experience of introduction to business and then subsequently enterprise and governance that I realized how good the drop-in sessions were. And that was one of the great and very pleasant discoveries of this last year, and it's something that even when we go back to regular classes, I will be scheduling, because it's just really nice to make those connections with students. So stay tuned for precise details on when live sessions will happen. I do want to hear from anyone, though, if there's a problem with straddling the period 3-4 divide. I don't see why there should be, because you're all assigned to period 3 and period 4. Of course, there's a 15-minute break in between. My own view is that the best way to make this work is smack bang in the middle. So we'll have the quiz period in advance, we'll have the live session in the middle, and then we'll have the consultation and maybe face-to-face or virtual activity afterwards. But if anyone sees an issue, please let me know. I know Wasser's position is that there is no one who should be double enrolled in classes. But I also do know that there are a couple of students in SILS, SP4 students, double degree students, who are in a particularly strange situation where they do have to complete something else over in the UGUC Centre. So if there's anyone in that situation, I want to know. Otherwise, I'll assume that we can straddle the regular period 3, period 4 divide. Okay, now let me turn now to substantive class material. And I was just testing before with Keynote with an upgrade, and sometimes Keynote kind of has some issues with the share. So I'm going to play it safe and use the PDF version that is already online. So I'm going to speak to something that you can download, and maybe you've already downloaded. Okay. Bear with me a sec. Okay, so what are about with communications? Of course, the course is called Designing Corporate Communications, but those of you who have already taken Enterprise and Governance or Introduction to Business will know that when we talk about corporate, although most people think of money, for profits, large numbers of organizations are legally corporations, but are not for profits as well. So this is not limited to spinning things to make cash. Okay, so anyone who wants to work for an MPO or a not-for-profit, such as like Waseda University or Gakahorjin, for example, an educational foundation, or increasingly to work for governments as well, regional governments, national governments, which are involved in place and nation branding. And that's one of the topics we'll be talking with Professor Johns and later on in the semester. So many organizations need to use high quality communications to achieve what they want to achieve. Of course, we see this now. Public health officers, the most prominent people we see today are the chief medical officers. They're on TV every single day. Ormi-san, who's head of the government's advisory board in relation to the pandemic, I believe, and he looks pretty good for his age, but I believe he's almost in his late 70s or something. Has to commute a long way into Tokyo every single day to do these horribly early press conferences and whatnot. So we're seeing that a whole bunch of people, even in medical services, realizing that communications are absolutely vital. Arguably, the whole state of emergency Kinkyu Jitai Sengen. And very strikingly, Sengen is a communicative act. Okay, it's a declaration. It is ultimately has communicative impact. And the most powerful argument for actually ending it was that it was just, it had lost its impact as a communicative device, that people became so used to it that they kind of stopped seeing it. You know, it's like you hang a picture on the wall and it moves you until you kind of stop seeing it. Hopefully this is not true in your personal relationship. You stop seeing the goodness in your partner, your friends or whatever. By the way, if you're feeling that, all you need to do is just freshen up the context, see people in a different light, see someone in their work environment dressed differently or whatever. The implication is if you wear the same daggy t-shirt at home all the time, don't be surprised if someone falls out of love with you. Okay, so it's about constantly refreshing and re-engaging people's attention. Okay, and this applies to every organization. So we need to think about the communicative act. And what's striking in this course is that I'm bringing design and design theory, particularly from design as encapsulated in design thinking, to the communications function. This is recently influential, but it's still not very common in university courses to put the two things together. So hopefully by the end of the course, you'll be much more familiar with the practice of professional communications, but also you'll have quite a good feel for design thinking. And that's very, very faddy here at the moment in Japan, as it is in other places. I think it can be quite a useful thing to talk about, for example, during your shukatsu process. So I'm devoting a particular whole week and a significant bit of reading around design thinking, which is quite accessible because so many of the people involved in it have a very strong sense that, you know, design must articulate and communicate effectively to audiences. So when we talk about being designed, we want to consciously find, identify, and solve problems of communication through all the means at one's disposal, legal means, of course. So we need empathy, energy, fresh insight. We need kind of counterintuitive and out there ideas for action if we just follow the same cliches. Adam and I were exchanging kind of e-groans yesterday with one major European car company, literally used in some advertising. I couldn't believe it. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Okay. Our response is, when life gives you a cliche, groan or threaten to vomit. Okay. Don't talk in cliches. Okay. Always find a fresh expression. When everyone says to me, when, you know, life gives you lemons, I always interrupt them and will say, make Moroccan pickled lemons, tartelette citron, what? Okay. Dundee marmalade. Just for God's sake, do not say lemonade. By the way, lemonade is one of my favorite things. Became particularly addicted to it when I was living in Israel. And I make a damn fine lemonade, but I don't like it being reduced to a cliche. So we need fresh perspectives, sometimes counterintuitive and very out there ideas for action. And this typically is arrived at through multiple iterations of deep engagement with the constraints of a problem. You know, one shot really gets you there. Okay, you have to keep trying and trying and trying. One of the basic principles in design is that there is not one correct answer. There are many propositions. Designers often use the discourse of a proposition or an intervention to say that, well, yeah, you've got some basic needs, but there are quite a number of ways that those needs could be met. Good design, though, does have a lot of common process elements and standards. And we can think in terms of a high level of resolution. Okay, you've got lots of contending and limiting constraints. And many designers emphasize that the tighter the constraints, the harder the designer has to work, and therefore the better it's likely to be. Architects are particularly focused on this. That much of the best architecture comes about when the site is difficult, the budget's limited, the program, what needs to be achieved with a building or an interior area space is difficult. So you're really, really forced to work very hard as a designer. And of course, all well-resolved design looks so much easier than it is. Okay, the best metaphor I can think of this is you look at a really good swimmer. A really good swimmer makes it look so easy. It's kind of effortless. You hardly even hear them in the pool. Someone, of course, is like, oh, splash, 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 just before they drown, okay, is kind of horrible. And we will see that very effective communications, oral communications, I'm going to talk about this as well, has this appearance of effortlessness. When you're really making an effort and you look like you're making an effort, it often doesn't create a very good impression. And I'll argue that there is a cultural problem here in a Japanese context because that gambatteru doryoku ne, it's very jikko appearu teki to hishi ni yatteru no chotto miseta ga atteru. In much of the world, that just looks very mittomo nai ne. And a bit of a warning on that, the more people look to be trying hard, very often they, in other cultural contexts, they're all thought to be actually kind of lacking in natural talent. It's a great danger, by the way. I think it's particularly an English thing, to pretend that you didn't study and just to make yourself look like a genius, that you get good marks. Okay, someone's just sent a message. I'm just checking. Right. Okay. Printing class materials not quite fitting with A4 papers. Okay. I'll come back to that. That is definitely kind of solvable, although the proportions in slides do not accord with A4. And there are two options for slides, 4:3 ratio or 16:9. And 16:9 works better with wide screens, particularly in video outputs. 4:3, on the other hand, is your standard format for things like iPads and whatnot. So these are tricky choices, but I will come back to that. Okay, so as I say here, good design has the wonderfully deceptive appearance of effortless simplicity, elegance. Okay. So when we talk about communicative acts, what are we focused on? Okay. Well, they're obviously going to use shared cultural resources. If you don't speak a common language or have in common reference points, then there is just simply no communication. So we must start with common lived experience. Now, fortunately, we are, to a much larger degree than people want to emphasize, part of a global culture. Let me roll out a screen for a second. If you have a fair bit of time, I strongly recommend this book, Sapiens, by Yuval Noah Harari. Some of you who took Enterprise and Governance will already know about this guy. It's very fat, but if there's one book you read during your student days, I recommend this. And there's a wonderful short discussion here where he said that there's almost no one on the planet now who is not part of a global culture to a more or less degree, okay, and really traces how that is. So that the fact that we do have so much in terms of a common lived experience actually makes communication possible. So objectives for the course: we want to understand the rapidly evolving practice of corporate communications. We're all digital now, especially when we're not. This is one of the big issues with branding consultancies. Dentsu, for example, loves to present itself as thoroughly digital and world-class. If you dive into Dentsu's sales figures, you see they're wildly profitable in Japan based off their traditional media selling and client relationships. Their huge international network is much less profitable, but actually the bulk of their digital work actually comes internationally. So greater growth prospects longer term. Dentsu understands that, Hakuhodo understand that, and so they're really trying to grow their digital skill set. This is a great opportunity for yourselves because even the most, yeah, someone's unmuted now and having a chat. Even the most savvy digital communications expert has only been doing this for 5 to 10 years. And a lot of people who pass themselves off as digital experts probably got a couple of years experience. So you can catch up with them quite quickly. We also want to get some theoretical insights into public communications. The theory does matter. I will explain further why. One of the perhaps a little bit surprising things, because of course technically I'm a business professor here, is that I really want to impart in this course enhanced visual, spatial, and rhetorical literacy, okay, as it relates to communication design. Put in a bit of context, although I teach business courses, my focus is very much creative industries, and that's what my Zemi is about. I paid my way through university myself, undergraduate, master's degree, doing photography work, and I've always had this kind of other string to my bow, and there was a real toss-up about whether I did the academic thing or whether I did the photography thing as a career. Of course, we also want to share our diverse perspectives and collaborate effectively, and that's a skill set we try and promote across so many classes in SILS, but particularly from a communications perspective. If you just don't get the cultural and identity dynamics, then you're really going to get yourself in trouble. And of course, so much of what we're seeing now in terms of contemporary political issues over the last year or two have been really about dealing with identity in more sensitive ways. There's a lot of controversy. Okay, assessment. So I've already talked about that. By the way, this is some crazy right-wing dude who, along with a whole bunch of other people, and they're out again on Sunday as well, outside the Korean Cultural Center in Yotsuya, talking like horrible chimpira, very jiko manzokuteki, satisfying themselves, being abusive and really rude Japanese. And I see lots of nice middle-class mums walking down the street and covering the ears of the little boys, saying, don't listen to these guys speaking like this, okay? So they're really talking to themselves, and they like getting dragged away by the police because that increases their own cultural stature. They don't for a moment think that they're actually going to influence the Korean government's policy, nor the Japanese government's policy, but they're out having a bit of a good time and driving the neighbors mad. Briefly, the topics. Next week, we're going to talk about pass and fail. Communication fails throughout history. I've put a not particularly exciting, briefly narrated set of slides about a very famous instant in utter military disaster that, as with most military disasters, is glorified because it was so damn embarrassing, a British military disaster in the Crimean War. So there's a narrated set of slides about that. It's pretty short. Have a look at that yourselves. I'm going to share some examples of the everyday, needlessly shabby and ordinary. And Japan provides endless examples of this. You know, Japan has this great monozukuri tradition, this artisanal tradition, and alongside it, it has this most tekito, ikagen, gomakashi, maiya kind of tendency, which the world doesn't really know about Japan. One of the paradoxes of Japan's branding, because so much of what comes from Japan has been in the form of manufactured goods abroad, is that so much of the best of Japanese working practices and whatnot, attention to detail, has been associated with engineers. On the other hand, and I'm sorry to say, but my working hypothesis is that for decades, Japan has been very badly served by Sodai or Soukei graduate Bunkei people who just, 口がうまくて、いつもちょっと浅い言葉でごまかすのすごく得意。And so we see routinely just slackness, whether it's English communications, whether it's 本当に浅いごまかし in terms of communications, which stands in striking contrast to the rigor and the professionalism of people who come through Nikkei and go on to be engineers. So reconciling those two things. You know, why is it that companies that spend so much money in developing quality goods never bother to pay ichiman yen to get a native speaker check, for example, on the instruction booklet that comes with it? You know, it's because for whatever reason, they just haven't taken seriously language. Historically, when you focused on the domestic market, foreign language, for example, was just ornamentation. And so it has never really been taken too seriously, which is a problem when you get to having 90% of your sales being global, for example. And that's why SIL students are in such strong demand. So we're going to ask some questions, not just in Japan, but other places. Why is so much professional communication practice just really, really bad? A friend of mine in a top Japanese company is a kacho of public relations. Unfortunately, the bucho came up through Katie, through kind of accounting. And this is not uncommon because a significant part of communications is investor relations. So people, who come through accounting, they end up being responsible for the communications because you're talking to shareholders and analysts. But my friend has the experience of every time he wants to send out a social media tweet, he has to go through the boss, who spends about 2 weeks sucking his teeth and deciding whether they should do it or not. By then, they've completely missed the opportunity. So there are a lot of cultural problems, organizational problems that lead to a lot of poor professional communications. But we'll also look at what makes for effective communications, and I'll show it to you later on, but I'm tiny, I know, on your screen, but I've got this message attributes checklist, okay? And we'll look at some good examples. Here's a simple one. Carton of milk. I was pouring it on my muesli, and I just thought, okay, you go to the trouble of milking the cow and maintaining perfect hygiene and distributing the milk in a really timely way so you don't poison people. But then you stick this English on it. It is the milk which milked the dairy cow, which has not given transgenic feed. It's the milk which milked the dairy cow. Okay. Don't use Google Translate. Okay. Although Google Translate works very well for some languages. It's remarkably good with Hebrew and English, for example. And one of my theories here is that there are so many brilliant Israelis who are working in Silicon Valley. So it's kind of advanced. But still for Japanese, it's not so good. Okay, getting personal. We'll talk about this next week. Fostering effective personal communications up front straight away, because some of you are already in shukatsu stage and whatnot. So making impressions, persuasion, I want to talk a little bit about this. And I particularly want to use a face-to-face about this, about how can you brand yourself and interact on this. So those of you on campus next week in the big classroom, this is primarily what we'll be kind of talking about. So if you want to bring along your own questions about, how can you create either a digital persona or do better in job interviews or all of those kind of things, I'm very happy to interact. A key thing is, of course, the human dimensions of corporate services. You can have the best products, you can have beautiful architecture and all the rest of it. But if the person you deal with from the company is really annoying, you're going to have a very bad impression. And we're seeing a whole lot of businesses are very deliberately taking humans out of the customer interface because humans are unreliable, okay? Warm, outgoing people who are very responsive, empathetic to others can do so much to protect a company who might be failing in terms of its service. Unfortunately, you don't know those people are reliably so until you've hired them and seen how they go. And of course, everyone wants those kind of people in the first place. So we do see, for example, and of course no one's seeing it now, but airlines are having automatically touch panels, check-in kiosks, automatic bag drop and whatnot. Various reasons for it. Partly humans would go on strike in some places, such as particularly France. Sometimes humans are expensive, but the less spoken truth is that often humans just don't provide very good customer interface, okay? And to be perfectly honest, as an Australian, when Qantas got rid of the ground staff on Qantas International on check-in, I've had many more better customer experiences. It's all good until I have to deal with a human being in Qantas. And then I think some of my fellow Australians have zero sense of service. I will say that many Australians are friendly, and if you get them on a good day, it's a wonderful customer experience. But if they're having a bad day, unfortunately, the customers are going to know about it too. Kind of unthinkable in Japan. On the other hand, in Japan, people just often follow the manual and won't get off script. So you might as well replace the people with robots because the people kind of act like robots. I do sometimes say that Japan makes really great robots from humans. Okay, so people are so afraid to get off script. And we are seeing, with the shortage of people, even just in the last year, companies like Uniqlo have moved towards completely automated interfaces for payments and things like that. So the changing technological and social contexts have huge implications. One interesting sets of issues is how you actually deal with the job hunting, the interview experience, when you're doing them completely online. And we can talk about that next week. Brand personality, this is going to be a recurrent theme. Professor Johns is quite an expert on this, and so we bring him into some of this stuff later on in the semester. But we need cohering narratives of brand personality, foundational stories, particularly if we look at, say, traditional arts and crafts. This is very significant. My friend, very senior in finance, I mentioned before, he says the great advantage with Tesla is it's got a story, a simple story. It's partly personified in the character of Elon Musk. But if you hear EV, electric vehicles, you think Tesla. And it is a major reason why it's just simply outperformed. He says it's simply so much easier to tell the Tesla story than it is, for example, Nissan, tragically, which had a very strong EV story, but many of the issues with coal gone and whatnot have become a big distraction. By the way, for 10 years, I've run a Nissan corporate case study course, which is temporarily suspended, but we'll be doing it again next year, probably in the spring. Okay, so questions of leadership in terms of defining the enterprise identity, particularly large organizations. How do we project our identity? And particularly ethos, the enterprise, the industry, place, it varies enormously. And increasingly, people demand authenticity, and we're going to devote a whole week to this. On the consumer side, and in terms of branding communications, how do you project authenticity? And one of our themes for next week, when we talk about personal communications, is this tension between, on the one hand, communications as aspiration. Fake it till you make it. You go out very publicly and say, this is what I want to do, what I want to be, and you put yourself out there publicly. It's almost kind of locking yourself into doing this. Historically, to a significant degree, this was the role of the wedding ceremony. You stand up in front of grandma and say, I promised to be faithful to this person, till death us do part, to look after them, blah, 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 blah. And then if the marriage falls apart, so many people say the most painful part of a divorce is actually going to tell the wedding guests, and particularly your grandma or your granddad, or, sometimes your parents, but normally they know that you're in a bad way. Tell the grandparents, sorry, it didn't work out. Maybe years and years and years ago, I sent a wedding gift to a friend in San Francisco, and then he turned up in Sydney, came to stay at my place with his backpack, with very limited luggage. And out of the backpack, he pulled the wedding gift out and said, oh, it didn't work out. I feel so bad. I have to give you the gift back. And I was just mortified that he carried it all the way. But he said, well, it had all this support, this big demonstration of commitment to this, and then it didn't work out. So there is this kind of locking yourself into something through declaration. Companies do this all the time. Announce it, and therefore you have to do it. That's very much in tension with authenticity, of being really true to yourself and showing your true self. And how do we reconcile the two? And then there's a whole bunch of fundamental issues of, okay, even if you've got the narrative figured out, what's your strategic intent? How do you execute your narrative strategy to get people to engage with what you're doing? Law and values, I'll just skip through this because we'll be talking about this pretty soon, but there's just a whole lot of things you have to get right, because even just a few words wrong in corporate communications can cost you millions. One of my cousins is a very successful lawyer, made his career mostly in insurance. And it comes down to such basic things in Incoterms, the trade doc and the trade docs. It's not even wrong words. It's actually just a few wrong initials can cost an enterprise millions of dollars. So getting communications right can be absolutely vital. We'll talk about, in a fundamental sense, perception. How do we make sense of the world as individuals? Our perception biases, the makings of our ways of seeing, and what patterns our perception biases. One of the most sobering results is that from a lot of experimental research is that Graduates of more prestigious universities, people with more money, people with higher income, don't listen to people who they think are less likely to listen carefully to people who they think are their inferiors academically. And lots of controlled studies have done this. You show a whole bunch of students a short video, ask them to fill a quiz about what the person said. If you tell them in advance that they are a graduate of a more prestigious university, students do better on the quiz. If you tell them that they are a graduate from a less prestigious university than the one they went to, they're less likely to recall what the person said. They just think, oh, it's a baka janaka, and they stop listening, okay? Even more sobering is that you show people images, and wealthier people often don't see the poor homeless person in the picture. Poorer people see the homeless person, okay? So we are remarkably blinded by our own life experience. That doesn't make us all bad. The simple truth is we have to protect ourselves. We all start off being very empathetic, and we would be overwhelmed by our empathetic regard if we didn't have some filters. Anyone who's seen a bunch of babies in childcare, one starts crying, every baby starts crying, okay? Crying is contagious, okay? So we kind of learn to not see certain things or learn to not feel certain things. Some people learn it too quickly and too extremely. Some people are hardwired, but only a small proportion of people are such psychopaths. Most people have a narrowed range of empathetic regard. And I'll come back to that because one of the really striking things that I want to work into this course is that if you really want to change the world, get people to agree to social reforms, you really have to expand the boundaries of their empathy. They have to think, I should start caring about that person of color, that woman, that migrant. Yes, that person is not someone like me, but someone not like me has an equal set of ethical claims or reasonable claims upon the good life as I do, and therefore I should show more regard for those other people who up until now have been acculturated to think doesn't really matter. And the Sapiens book very much talks about that. Design thinking is about taking design out of the hands of the design professionals so that everyone can use it. And we'll talk a lot about that. I'll just skip through it now. One of the things that comes out of design thinking, but is broader than that, is the power of kind of redescription. And I want to talk about this, discuss it and deploy it. Okay, made a new word. Where, as I've just said, to expand the boundaries of ethical regard, we'll briefly look at a very famous liberal philosopher, Richard Rorty, passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, who was professor of philosophy, who then moved to the literature department at Stanford, because he said in the end, he kind of realized if you really want to change the world, that it's actually the novelist or the filmmaker or the documentary maker who can have a real impact. And all this discussion of natural rights and whatnot, people dismiss that. But when you actually engage people with the life experience of others or redescribe circumstances in which they are, you can create empathetic regard. But it's much broader than this. The phone, we call it a phone. Who does voice? My sister rings me from time to time. I think she's the only person who ever calls without warning me in advance that she's at least going to do so. Okay, that's why from years ago, people in the industry were referring to these as a handset. Okay, overwhelmingly, phones are kind of mini computers where we just simply interact digitally. So the regular voice is a very small component of it, except for those annoying people who just walk around the street like this. And why do people hold their phones like this? Blah, 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 with their mask off and all the rest of it. So just little COVID launch pads for people. So we want to talk then about visuality. It's absolutely critical. Visual communications theory, think about colors, cultures, and visual languages, and the visual representation of complex information. This is a significant area of communication design now that's growing rapidly, and you'll see it everywhere because we are simultaneously much more data-driven. COVID has shown this. The top news every single night at NHK, 7 p.m. is the COVID count, okay? We look to numbers. But as so many of you are struggling or have struggled with the compulsory statistics course here, human beings are not very good at making sense of large numbers. So the visual representation of complex information becomes absolutely vital. Fortunately, Japan provides some very good examples of this, okay? Just simply navigating the complexities of the Tokyo public transport system is made so much easier because some people have spent a lot of time figuring out how you can communicate this information in user-friendly kinds of ways. So I don't want people to think that I come with a real bias towards Japan in terms of communication design. Japan, at certain periods in its history, has led the world in terms of visual communications, which makes it very frustrating that at other times you see so much that's so bad, okay? And we can talk about why that is the case. Another thing I really want to emphasize is spatiality. And this is not outer space, but this is significant, firstly, in terms of design of our virtual interfaces. Websites have been very two-dimensional now. We're on the cusp of seeing widespread virtual three-dimensionality. And some of the most influential developments from there are actually from the world of games. So if anyone knows the company Epic Games, for example, that are currently in a legal battle. Epic Games makes Fortnite. That's an illegal, some of you may be very addicted to, like my young son, addicted to Fortnite. Epic Games is battling with Apple at the moment. But Epic Games can kind of afford to do that, and they're deliberately doing that because they also have another product, which, by the way, you can download for free and watch a whole lot of videos and teach yourself how to do. If anyone wants to turn yourself into a digital designer, interface designer, they have a awesome software called Unreal Engine, which is one of the two major software platforms for creating three-dimensional spaces, which is largely being used in game design. It gives that very distinctive Fortnite kind of feel. But increasingly it's used in architecture, and it's going to be used, and other variants as well, in terms of virtual retail spaces, for example. So we need a very strong sense of spatiality, of Rittaikan, okay? And especially when we're all stuck looking at flat screen devices when it's less easy to go shopping, for example. So space, of course, is ubiquitous around us in the big city, in public and private domains, in virtual spheres of communicative action, and how we repurpose spaces, and how we design communicative spaces. And we'll talk too about architecture as a communicative act. And one of the things that's interesting to talk about, and I would like to have this conversation when we have a face-to-face or a virtual drop-in, is, if you're the Waseda president, what kind of Waseda would you build and what would you be saying? So this is a nice way to think in advance of what we'll be doing with the group work. Interfaces, I think we all understand, strong emphasis on user orientation, interface design. Unfortunately, Japan's actually been really quite weak on this in recent decades. And we see one of the sad things is Japan's had some really world-class technologies, but often the interface designs kind of let companies down, and it's allowed third parties to come to the fore and pinch market share from them. But increasingly, communication design is about all touch points, all interaction, whether it's the company website, the product, walking into the retail space. You want common brand experience. We could say a lot about, what the Waseda digital interface is like. I have my own kind of critical views on that. Earning attention. This is something I think it's obvious to all of you in the world of social media. So many things that companies are trying to do to constantly get our attention. Okay, authenticity we've touched on and we'll come back to. But also we need to think in terms of when a company's in a not very good way, or they've got a good product but they haven't been able to sell it, or the competitors are jumping over them because they've got much more customer engagement. How do you actually, consciously redesign the company brand, its communications? A friend of mine who works for a top Japanese company, a company that all of you know, just say that he's a year ago he was in a meeting where quite explicitly, everyone was saying, look, we definitely have the best product in this market segment. And he and some other people more on the market side were saying, yeah, but our rivals with the inferior product is spending the equivalent of a year's turnover to push their brand. And some on the kind of the Katie people said that's a waste of money. We got the better product, it will sell. Well, a year later, what happened? Great product didn't sell, unfortunately, because they really didn't invest in, at least creatively, getting the product known out there in global markets. So one of the horrible, horrible truths is very often the better sold product beats the better product. So the poor product, well sold, often steals a lot of market share from the good product, poorly sold. And it's actually not so easy to get companies to transform their own self-stories, their self-narratives. It's partly about convincing people inside the company to how they project themselves outside the company. Similarly with place branding, which is even more complicated because you've got so many stakeholders who maybe just don't agree with the whole positioning, okay? We're going to look in detail about how communication design very much relates to politics as well. Some very interesting cases. Hong Kong in recent years have shown this. Also the creative ways in which unhappy customers fight back against large companies, and then the crisis communication companies crisis communication challenges that companies face. So we'll draw a lot of conclusions, and we'll also be giving you feedback on your group presentations towards the end there. Now, let me stop the share briefly, and I want to go over to a very brief introduction to brand narratives. This is overwhelmingly just visual slides, just as a way of reminding us that a lot of the brand communication challenges, let me throw so you can see me in full. So the brand communication challenges, particularly with things like the use of logos and whatnot, have been around for an extraordinarily long time. And historically, when most people were not actually literate, when they couldn't read, the use of symbols, visual communications were even more important. Now, just this last weekend, it's been Easter, so Good Friday on last Friday, and then Fukatsai, Easter on Sunday. So those of you of Christian background would know that. Of course, for many people who are not religious in Western society, it's all about Easter eggs. Okay, crazy stories about bunnies bringing chocolate and all the rest of it. But of course, traditionally, Easter is religious and the most important date in the Catholic Church calendar in particular, even more so than Christmas, because Christmas marks when Christ was born, but Easter marks when he allowed himself to be sacrificed for people. That's the Christian narrative. Okay. So branding is traditionally associated, of course, with a product or a logo, and the whole notion of a brand is literally, burning your mark onto cows. So that if someone steals it, you can say, hey, that's my mark on a cow. You clearly stole it. The implication was if you stole someone's cow, you want to eat it very quickly, okay, because they're invariably branded somewhere. So it had a very strong visual orientation, okay? And then those marks and logos are a prompt to shared knowledge, narratives, and identities, and very complex bundles of meaning, tales of origin. And so the mere sight of the symbol and the subtlety of the symbol taps incredible complexity of accumulated meanings. And so unpacking that is a significant part of understanding corporate communications, any kind of communications, and in particular in communication design. So we really need to understand the identity markers that are out there that we can leverage. And of course, to try and create new ones, you have the disadvantage of not being able to tap that, but also the freedom as well. Now, it's often said that yeah. Any interaction? Right? No. Okay. The crucifix is often said to be the most successful storied logo in history. Okay. These are pictures that I took in Jerusalem when I was on sabbatical there for a year. Okay. This is in the Russian Orthodox Church, where Russian Orthodox pilgrims come because they believe is on the site where Christ was crucified. By the way, the Catholics have a different story, and so they have a fight over it. What is really striking is if you get to go to Jerusalem is that there are over 20 different Christian sects there. Many of them have subtle differences in the form of the crucifix. And so people, as soon as they see it, they know exactly which particular kind of sect that is marked. And how people play with this, I've put on the website. You can see this directly, the course website, go across to the links. Jesus Christ Superstar, very famous musical, and the film version, which is uber camp and stylish from 1973, probably more edgy than you could make today, and the depiction of the sacrificed Christ and the risen Christ, and also a very camp take on King Herod. By the way, it was filmed in Israel. So you can see all these different crucifixes, each making contending claims, speaking to their own particular believers with very subtle differences. This one here, coupled with the architecture, speaks very much to this being a German Protestant church that was built in the late 19th century, funded by the Kaiser of Unified Germany, and he came actually to Jerusalem to see it. That's a closer up kind of image there, and of course they built it higher than the surrounding churches to be closer to God, usual bombast. And we see any of you of a German background or know about military history will be that the bravery awards that the German army, since Germany was unified after the Franco-Prussian War, took the form of an iron cross. So this is a very distinctly German cross with projection of values. Okay, so I'm just going to skip through these, but you can look through them yourself. And of course, people mark their faith by wearing a cross, and you can see all of the differences here. But unquestionably, the most striking architectural feature, of course, is not the Christian churches in Jerusalem all, although the one in the background is interesting. It's a Russian one. This is actually the Dome of the Rock, which of course is an Al-Aqsa Mosque there, which is an astonishing thing to behold. So authenticity is a modern obsession. We'll talk further about it in detail. But I want to give you a simple case study here. And some of you know from Interaction Business that I'm particularly fond of snowboarding. And this brand is a particularly interesting one. It's now 25 years old, and I've put some shots here and some links on the website. You can see the corporate communications they engage in. They're a very famous skateboard and snowboard brand, but so much of the imagery and what they do in terms of their corporate communications and their eco initiatives are all tied towards Hawaii. So the culture of rider culture, which carried over to skateboarding, and then a very West Coast take on snowboarding. It all makes sense, even though the one thing, interestingly, they don't do is they don't make surfboards. Okay, now it does make sense if you look at the layers of meaning that are there. Okay, and you can go directly into the website and you can see this. This is their most recent thing they've just put up there, telling their own brand story. And they explicitly call themselves a collective rather than a regular company. The products manifest in terms of tales of origins. They collaborate with artists. A proportion of their sales go into reforestation projects, for example, centered on Hawaii. And you can look at those videos online, the Hawaii Legacy Reforestation Initiative. But they also emphasize an artisanal element, which is very much associated with kind of hipster culture over the last couple of decades, emphasizing handmade in the US as well. So an artisanal element. Their skateboards started, their story there is that they were repurposing snowboards that were either worn out or had defects. They were cutting down, turning them into skateboards, and then they moved into the business there as well. So a few lessons, common design aesthetics across really diverse products, even into their clothing. So you've got coherent brand narratives, the product attributes, you know, the wood decks, for example. A lot of other companies copy this now, but if you're ever a snowboarder, you know, you're out there and by the lift and you see someone with a beautiful wooden deck, chances are it's an arbor, okay? So that really communicates something. And of course, their eco initiatives are all geared towards reforestation as well. But then there's this collaborative dimension as well, because one of the striking things in snowboarding is, that every year the new products are released, and as every year they differentiate the product through design, particularly strong visual communications. And there's an endless stream of graphic designers who want to work with snowboard companies, because the old best business around, the designing record covers, has kind of disappeared with music streaming. So you've got a lot of artists who are going to work with them, and hence they present themselves as a collective. At the same time, of course, most of their brand communications happens through content, shareable digital content. But if you look at their website, you can see too very clever communications to actually help people navigate the product range. So the communication is not just about selling the product, it's helping people to actually make a decision about the best product for themselves. So the strong visual orientation becomes hugely important. Now, I've got one other short set of slides that I put on the side I won't show now because we're at time. I just simply point to London as an example of a place brand. And you can look at those few slides, and I've got a few links there that someone, for me growing up in Australia, London Calling is associated with a certain pop song. But the notion of London Calling too goes back to World War II, when the Free British Radio used to broadcast into occupied Europe during World War II. And the very famous sound of Big Ben, which was recorded, became kind of a sound out of the darkness, which communicated certain kind of liberal, progressive, hopeful kind of values. And still today, that is very much leveraged in terms of Britain trying to project itself in the world at large. Many of the images they use, of course, have been reinforced by a whole range of cultural product, whether it's Sherlock Holmes or whatnot, and you can look at those slides there. So brand stories leverage existing cultural product, nudge it in interesting new kind of ways. But if you're too shameless in trying to commercialize an existing culture, then you can get a massive backlash. And so we'll be talking a lot in the course about how we do this. One of the really important implications is, if you want to be very good at communication design, you need to be culturally very savvy. And I think this is a real pitch for the benefits of a liberal arts education. You get an experience, a whole range of things. You're just going to be a so much better communicator and designer if you have diverse experiences. And if you just really learn to pay attention and try and decode all the complex layers of meaning in so much that surrounds us. Okay, I'll leave it there. I'll just simply emphasize that this is something you're going to see in a week or two's time, and you're going to see repeatedly a kind of checklist of what we need with kind of message attributes. I'll refer to this next week when we talk about personal communications and communication fails in particular, because this basic checklist, it's pretty obvious when people get it kind of wrong. And one of the interesting things is, like so much in life, it's often difficult to say why things are good. It's much easier to say why things are not good. So often success is the absence of well understood failures. Okay, so if we have the checklist, we can apply it to ourselves. We can apply it to pretty much everything we do, whether we're doing it for our sakuru, for a company we go to work for our university or whatever. Okay, that's us done today. I'm happy to hang around. I just have to do some preps for tomorrow, so I'll keep this session open for a bit. So if anyone wants to ask me any kind of practical questions, that's fine. Otherwise, take your leave, and I look forward to getting to know everybody during the semester, particularly through either the virtual or the face-to-face free talk sessions and whatnot that we're going to have. So thank you very much. Cheers.